The Honorable Mia Amor-Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Dr. Mukisa Kitui, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, Senator Dr. the Honorable Jerome Walcott, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Barbados, the Honorable Sandra Husbands, Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Mr. Didier Tribuc, the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Ambassador Chad Blackman, Permanent Representative of Barbados to the United Nations in Geneva, ambassadors and representatives of UNCTAD member states, members of the National Organizing Committee for UNCTAD 15 and their counterparts in the UNCTAD Secretariat, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Bonjour, buenos dias. I'm Sharon Marshall, Master of Ceremonies for this morning's program. As you are no doubt aware, in June last year, the government of Barbados was accorded the honor of hosting the 15th Quadrennial Conference of UNCTAD. Barbados will become the smallest country to host such a conference. So this morning, it is a matter of considerable national pride that Barbados affirms its commitment to host UNCTAD 15 with the signing of the host country agreement. We should have been welcoming delegates here in October this year, but COVID-19 intervened and the event had to be postponed. The pandemic has also given rise to a virtual signing ceremony, with the two principal parties in this undertaking socially distanced in two different countries. Prime Minister Mia Motley is here to sign the agreement on behalf of Barbados, and Secretary General Dr. Mukisa Kitui will sign on behalf of UNCTAD from Nairobi, Kenya. I now invite Dr. Kitui to sign the document. Dr. Kitui? Signed in Nairobi. Thank you, Dr. Kitui. I invite Foreign Minister Walcott and Mr. Tribuc to witness as Prime Minister Motley now signs the agreement on behalf of Barbados. Ms. Motley signs with a flourish. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, gentlemen. You may take your seats. I invite Dr. Kitui to deliver his statement.
Well, thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies. The Right Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, dignitaries assembled in Barbados, in Geneva, and around the world, representatives of member states, ladies and gentlemen. From the outset, may I, on behalf of UNCTAD, express again our condolences to the family, friends, and members of the community, both of Barbados and the Caribbean region, for the demise of former Prime Minister Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur. While Arthur will be remembered for his great development advocacy, his significant economic reforms nationally, as well as his efforts to seek unity through curriculum, we at UNCTAD will remember him for his tireless effort and contribution as the chair of the Global Trade and Development Commission in preparation of UNCTAD 15, which always put the needs of the developing countries and the small island developing states at the top of the agenda. 4 years ago in Nairobi, UNCTAD 14 was a Pathfinder Conference as the first meeting of the development community globally after the signing of Agenda 2030 in September 2015. Today, on our way to Barbados, we have a dual first that comes with the UNCTAD 15 conference. First is the first development community meeting taking stock of where we have reached at the start of the decade of action for Agenda 2030. But secondly, it comes as the first of the development community's meetings looking at the global new normal emerging from the COVID pandemic. We at UNCTAD see UNCTAD 15 as an opportunity to look at where we have been sluggish in realizing the goals of Agenda 2030, but also what are the new imperatives before us. For example, we estimate that developing countries will need 2.5 trillion US dollars in immediate resources to begin meeting the challenges of the pandemic. And that beyond the outstanding SDG investment gap and the disrupted global supply networks, we have challenges including how to bridge the already existing gap of $120 billion for LDC countries alone. This pandemic has led to economic standstill, closed borders, and a severe retrenchment in cross-border economic activity. This has effectively paralyzed trade as an engine for sustainable prosperity. Compounded with pre-existing lack of trust in multilateralism, the global trading system has been woefully unprepared for this global health crisis. Key increases in demand for our work reflect this: facilitation of trade and transport, support to the digital transition in developing countries, and the looming need for international liquidity and relief from debt vulnerability. This has surged to the top of many countries' agendas. The COVID crisis has hit the most vulnerable countries and people hardest, at a time when they already were not doing well. Some 70 million more people living in LDCs will be pushed into extreme poverty over this year alone, increasing the global poverty headcount ratio for the first time in 2 decades. And the most vulnerable extends beyond the poorest to include seeds, women, micro and small medium enterprises, among others. For example, the services industry, especially travel and tourism, have been among the most hard hit. As Barbados knows very well, these sectors are the lifeline of seeds and are disproportionately sources of employment for women and for small businesses, all of whom are imperiled by the present pandemic's economic fallout. COVID-19 has been a litmus test for a globalized and interdependent world economy, and the verdict it has delivered is very clear. The pandemic and its fallout have exposed existential challenges to the very tenets of globalization and will have a lasting impact on future efforts by developing countries to gainfully benefit from the global economy. After a decade of stagnation, trade and investment, COVID-19 will be the inflection point, catalyzing a transformation of international production towards more reshoring, regionalization, and resilience beyond the pandemic. The next normal will bring shorter supply chains, greater digitalization, and a lighter global production footprint. It will mean a shift from just-in-time logistics to just-in-case resilience, and increased focus on the sustainability of private finance, on the blue economy, on biodiversity as a source of comparative advantage, and changes in consumer tastes towards the local and the greener. The deglobalizing trend underpinning this shift also raises the stakes of South-South cooperation, including regional integration ambitions, like the Continental Free Trade Area of Africa. It also raises the stakes for international private-public cooperation, for example, on issues such as combating illicit financial flows and illicit trade. The pandemic has starkly revealed that we must transform global approaches to trade and development if we are to chart a sustainable course to a better recovery. But rather than building back better, as some have called it, we need to rebuild entirely from the ground up, because for too many, going back to business as usual is anathema to sustaining prosperity. As the number of COVID-19 cases continue to rise globally, and particularly in the developing world, the global economy enters a synchronized recession, and since the Second World War. Today, developing countries the world over need the galvanized attention of the international community. An UNCTAD conference at this time offers just the type of focused attention necessary to deal with these issues. UNCTAD 15 will shape the ambitions for a better recovery. countries have realized the devastating limits of current development practices. This gives us a window of opportunity to build a political will towards the systemic changes needed for truly better recovery, despite the current steep obstacles to international solidarity. From a trade and development perspective, a better recovery must be green, resilient, just, and digital. But it must also be for all peoples and all countries, not just those who can afford it. UNCTAD conferences have generated ambitious solutions and rebuilt goodwill among nations in the past. UNCTAD 15 in Barbados must be such a conference. It must offer hope for the vulnerable, small island developing states facing lost tourism and travel revenues. It must offer feasible instruments to African countries and the least developed countries looking to develop their productive capacities. It must offer a path forward on debt forgiveness and digital cooperation, especially for developing and middle-income countries. It must also offer solutions to the trade and development challenges facing other global processes next year, such as LDC 5 and WTO MC 12. It is my firm belief that with Barbados as our host country and with the resolute commitment of all our membership, we can achieve a path forward on all these challenges next April in Bridgetown. I offer my sincere thanks to you, Right Honorable Prime Minister Maya Amor Motley, and a capable, even amidst difficult challenges, a team that has been working from behind you. We look forward to continue working together with you, your government, to ensure that UNCTAD 15 delivers on its promise and harnesses its potential for the benefit of all members of the United Nations family. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kitui. It is now the turn of Prime Minister Motley to give her remarks.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Dr. Kitui, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Senator Dr. the Honorable Jerome Walcott, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Barbados, and the Honorable Sandra Husbands, Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Mr. Didier Trebek, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS, Ambassador Chad Blackman, who is in Geneva, listening to us, our permanent rep in Geneva, and members of the National Organizing Committee of UNCTAD 15 and the counterparts in the UNCTAD Secretariat, representatives of the media, ladies and gentlemen, friends all. I'm delighted to be able to join with you, Secretary General, in Nairobi. I wish I was there with you, and please extend my very best to my dear friends there. But I'm sorry that we are unable of being together at this point in time. But nevertheless, we recognize that from all who are participating from multiple jurisdictions, that this is a historic event. And this historic event allows us to sign the host country agreement between your Secretariat, Secretary General, as well as the government of Barbados on arrangements for the 15th session of this UNCTAD Congress. I use the word historic deliberately, and I believe with some justification. This is the first time that my government has put its signature on an agreement with another international or bilateral party without actually having the signatories together in the same room, in the same country. I think it is also a first for the UNCTAD Secretariat, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, SG. We all know the circumstances that have prompted this creative solution, which may well prove not only to be precedent-setting, but indeed a foretaste of the new norm. By signing this agreement, Barbados confirms its intent to become the first Caribbean country and the first small island developing state ever to host a session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. At no time in recent memory have those two words, trade and development, seemed more significant than now. It is also undoubtedly a first for us to attempt to plan and carry out a major international conference in the midst of such unprecedented global turbulence and uncertainty. Some may say we're mad. We in the Caribbean have regrettably become all too accustomed to dealing with the onslaught of hurricanes, which track annually through our island chain with devastating economic and social consequences. Yet never in our history has one hurricane decimated all of our countries all at once in the way that this vicious virus called COVID-19 has managed to do to the community of nations. Caribbean states have done well to manage and contain the spread of the pandemic within our jurisdictions, but our tourism-dependent open economies have had little defense against the global economic contagion that has followed. And indeed, today, our governor of the central bank will share the extent of our decline in the second quarter with the country as a result of zero travel for a number of months. As you know, COVID-19 has also already impacted the staging and convening of UNCTAD 15, which we have been forced to reschedule from the original dates in October of this year. It proved impossible to proceed as normal given the trajectory of the global pandemic as we see before us every day, the closure of borders and the disruption of global air travel, as well as the suspension of physical meetings of the PrEP meetings and negotiating bodies in Geneva. I cannot deny that the current environment continues to challenge us. Yet it is a challenge the government of Barbados and the UNCTAD Secretariat are prepared to accept. We remain positive that by next year, the determined efforts of world scientists and the prudent precautionary measures we are putting in place will help to make the convening of UNCTAD 15 a reality. After careful consideration and consultation with SG yourself and the UNCTAD membership, I'm pleased therefore to confirm that the 15th session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development will now be held in Barbados from the 25th of April to the 30th of April 2021. Pre-conference events continue to include 6 fora on youth, civil society, gender and development, global commodities, the creative industries, and trade digitization, which are all planned for the 23rd and 24th of April. The government of Barbados is committed to delivering a conference that allows for the universal participation of the 195 member states of UNCTAD, while fully protecting the health and the safety of both the visiting delegates and the local population. We aim to provide a platform for consequential deliberation and action by ministers and for serious engagement with civil society, young people, and the private sector. Above all, we are determined to make UNCTAD 15 an inclusive and unforgettable event. Indeed, SG, the saying from you just now, on the way to Barbados, had a certain ring to it. But we intend to offer you an unforgettable and significant event with opportunities for creativity and entrepreneurship for the people of Barbados first and foremost. On February 5th this year, UNCTAD member states reached agreement on the theme for the conference, and that is from inequality and vulnerability to prosperity for all. In retrospect, our choice could not, SG, have been more relevant or timely. The global pandemic has reminded us how vulnerable and how exposed we are to shocks that threaten our very existence, let alone our development. It has reminded us of the value of family, of relationships, of the environment, of all of the things in the world that we started to take for granted. And equally, the challenges to multilateralism continue to be exacerbated, regrettably, in this world at a time when international cooperation is needed more than ever if our nations are to attain their strategic objectives and their SDGs, but most importantly, immediately, if we are to arrest this virus. During the past few months, we've also witnessed worldwide protests as ordinary people of all ages, races, and backgrounds and stages have taken to the streets to call for greater equality and social justice. This global phenomenon has put leaders on notice that the disadvantaged and the vulnerable of the world are no longer prepared to be marginalized and forgotten, and that citizens everywhere are standing beside them in the call for radical change. You must forgive me, SG, if I recall also the Raoul Prebisch lecture that I delivered in Geneva last year, where I reflected on the fact that for too many small island developing states, our plight has been to be invisible to the global community, and in some instances, regrettably, we feel dispensable. The remarkable convergence that we are witnessing globally demands from the international community an equally determined response. Some may choose to reflect it in the concept of reparations, some may choose to reflect it in the concept of development. But what we do know is that arbitrary criteria that lock countries and lock populations into limited access to resources cannot continue to be the order of the day, and that we have ultimately to be able to give expression to the reality that there must be fairness. Locking the inequity that was put on us 75 years ago with respect to the establishment of the United Nations in circumstances where we have not seen the affirmative action and sufficient development opportunities for small island developing states is one of the key drivers that has put Barbados to want to host this conference and to be able to put the issues of our small island states at the center of the global discussion. I firmly believe that this theme therefore provides us with a real opportunity to address some of these systemic causes of the vast and growing inequalities and the inherent vulnerabilities that we have come to accept as just part and parcel of our reality. There is nothing that is acceptable about inherent vulnerability or inequality. And to use the language of Graça Machel a few weeks ago in a similar United Nations forum, inequalities are man-made and therefore can be destroyed and removed by man as well. New thinking and bold action, therefore, my friends, are urgently required if we hope to succeed in our efforts to end poverty and to provide equal opportunities for all, because that's what unites us as a people across the world. In summary, the COVID-19 global emergency and the extreme repercussions have exposed, therefore, that need for fundamental rethinking of those assumptions that have guided us for the last few decades, that have previously underpinned the international economic order as it has come to be. It is an order that is no longer servicing the needs of too many of us across the global community. In a sudden and unexpected way, the crisis, therefore, has provided the membership of UNCTAD with a unique opportunity to be at the forefront of this new thinking and radical policy corrections that the situation now requires. You and I, SG, share the conviction that UNCTAD 15 must be a transformational conference with transformational outcomes. Decisive leadership by our governments is urgently needed if we are seriously committed to empowering our multilateral institutions to respond to the acute and persistent development challenges of the 21st century. Might I add that this is even more appropriate now after listening to the Secretary General of the United Nations in his Nelson Mandela address a few weekends ago, where he called for a new global deal and a new social contract. Now, that is exactly where we are seeking to go with respect to this conference. And the question is, will sufficient countries across the global community summon the political will to rise to this great challenge for this new global deal and this new social contract that is so patently required if we are to move and to move our people forward and to sustain our earth. As host of the conference, the Barbados government anticipates that ministers will debate and provide, therefore, leadership on a range of issues, some of which you've spoken about, SG. These include, of course, the impact of COVID-19, not just on trade and development as we know it, but also on our ability to be able to attain the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030, as you said, because at the end of the day, that is what we are all charged to do at the domestic level. We will also hopefully discuss and consider elements related to the future of the multilateral trading system, the nexus between health and trade and policy formulation that is now so evidently needed. the measurement of vulnerability and the management of debt, especially given that all countries across the entire global family have had to be able to deal with some level of increased debt as a result of our ability to manage the cessation of revenue as well as the increased expenditure that we've had to undertake in the context of COVID. And to that extent, how do we deal with what is an acceptable measurement of debt for macroeconomic stability, given the fact that this has impacted all of us globally? We will address as well the structural transformation of developing countries, many of which who feel that they were never given the policy framework or flexibility to build on their development at the time of independence. The growth of the digital economy that has now become that glue that has kept the world together at a time when physical movement has had to stop. The impact of climate change on trade and development, and indeed on the capacity of small island developing states to survive as nation states. Trade facilitation and transportation. The importance, of course, of regional integration in building resilient value and supply chains to strengthen our business community systems and to deal with what must now be one of our major objectives, food security. And of course, there is the unfortunate reality that if we don't do all of this in a way to avoid the experience of the last few months, where the global trading system looked more like the wild, wild, wild west than it did like anything that was ordered by human beings to suit the third decade of the 21st century. We hope never to have to experience that reality again, where we understood in a very real way what it is like to be small and to be bullied and to be left alone in the corner of the world without access to critical goods and services and in vitro therapeutics needed to fight off this pandemic. Secretary General, I also therefore eagerly await your report to the conference, which I understand will serve as a main input to the preparation of the outcome document. I'm sure that it will provide us with a serious solution-oriented analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on various aspects of the global economy, as well as the trade and development imperatives of developing countries. I anticipate that the position papers and working documents of the various groups that inform the negotiations of the preparatory committee will similarly reflect the dramatically changed global reality. And I know, SG, that we started last year reflecting on its future in the Eminent Persons group that you gathered, which you accorded Barbados the honor of being able to serve in, as well as to reflect our perspective and that of small island developing states. My friends, there is another input, and we all know it, that the government of Barbados offered to this process in the form of the Global Commission on Trade and Development, Options 2020. Professor the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, former Prime Minister of Barbados and an eminent regional and international statesman, was appointed as chairman of the commission. And when I invited him to do so, he enthusiastically accepted and worked with his fellow commissioners to have final conclusions and recommendations available in the near future as an independent contribution to the preparatory process, the UNCTAD 15. Owen Arthur's untimely death on July 27th has deprived Barbados, the Caribbean, and small island developing states of an exceptional nation builder and regional integrationist. It has deprived the international community of one of the most ardent advocates for the concern of our small states. As a mark of respect for the late Prime Minister Arthur, we postpone the signing of this agreement and this ceremony until today. As a tribute to his memory, we intend to complete and to build upon the work of the Commission and to find a fitting way to honor his legacy during UNCTAD 15. I think anyone who knew Owen Arthur would tell you that his passion was international trade and how it impacted on small states and vulnerable people, how it also created opportunities for them. I look forward, therefore, Secretary General, to being able to join you and your team and all of the other member states when you come to Barbados. But as we close, I'd like to thank all who have labored hard to bring us to this point. It has not been easy, either in Geneva or in Barbados, and to the extent that your paths have been interrupted by COVID-19, your efforts are even all the more appreciated by our government and I'm sure the rest of the small island states who are looking to this conference to be a path breaker for the development opportunities and the policy options available to us all. My friends, in signing this agreement, my country reiterates its strong commitment to multilateralism, to the United Nations system as an indispensable platform to support the development of all states, particularly those of us that have specific and unique challenges. For that was why the United Nations was formed 75 years ago. If I have but one regret with the postponement of this conference, is that instead of us being able to celebrate as a global community on October 24th, those 75 years, we will have to hold it in our hearts and wait until 2021 to come together and give that true celebration that hopefully will be allowed at that time because of the progress of the work of our scientists globally. I want to thank each and every one of you and to look forward to full deliberations in the course of UNCTAD 15, and for it to be said truly that a small state has come forth and that a small state has given voice to the expressions and the desires and the aspirations of billions across this earth who feel that their opportunity and their chances at trade and development must be as real as the largest among us. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. The logo for UNCTAD 15 was created by Barbadian graphic designer Donna Redmond, Director of Special Projects at Acute Vision Incorporated. We're pleased to have Ms. Redmond with us here this morning as we present that logo to you now. The logo consists of a graphic and a written dimension built around three elements: a tree trunk, its canopy of leaves, and the conference information text. It is essentially a graphic representation of the mahogany tree, native to the region, and was designed to reflect that the conference is to be hosted by Barbados. The healthy tree represents a focus on climate change, the environment, and sustainable development. The image of a trunk constructed of three people with its branches opening is also a symbol of social and economic growth. The trunk is the anchor of the logo and represents the strength of the human family and need for inclusive, collective action to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Above the trunk is an umbrella-shaped canopy of intertwined and connected leaves. This element represents the different people, groups, cultures, and countries working together for the same overall objective: prosperity for all. The multicolored palette subtly recalls the color wheel of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also represents renewal through the changing color of leaves and diversity. An inspiring orange is used for UNCTAD, and 15 in the logo, embodying encouragement, stimulation, and creativity, and so reflects the hope to reach prosperity for all. The yellow and blue of the trunk and the blue in which the word Barbados is written are drawn from the flag of Barbados and indicate its role as host country in bringing all stakeholders together to debate common approaches for global challenges. The three figures form a stylized broken trident, the symbol of independence depicted at the center of Barbados's national flag. So we congratulate Ms. Redmond. As host country, we are looking forward to welcoming delegates and their accompanying parties to Barbados next April. For your benefit, we wish to share a brief video of what the host country has to offer. You may wish to select full screen to view it to best advantage. Ladies and gentlemen, Destination Barbados.
We may be a little island, but we've got big heart. Things are a little quiet now, but we've got big hopes. It may take a while until we see you again, but we've got big plans. So as you dream of brighter days, just remember, Barbados will be here, from Bridgetown to Oistins Bay, inside and out, through and through. We may be a little island, but we're bigger and stronger with you. So take care, stay safe, and stay joyful. The time will come when we say, welcome, Barbados Nice.
We hope that brief video will inspire those of you joining us virtually from abroad to come experience Barbados for yourselves. And now the Prime Minister and the Secretary General have agreed to entertain questions from members of the media. We have some journalists here in person and some who are participating online. We already have a few questions, but I will ask the journalists who are present to kindly state their names, the media houses which they represent, and indicate the person to whom the question is directed. And I'm going to be fair and go first to the first question, which was received via email. This is from a German television journalist, Serna Ademir, and the question is to the Secretary General, and the suggestion is that the Prime Minister may want to add some elements to his answer. The question is, what influence will the coronavirus have on the future development agenda? What influence will the coronavirus have on the future development agenda?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, in spite of the forces and headwinds against globalization and multilateralism, the COVID pandemic has reminded us of our interconnectedness, that there is no part of the universe which is secure unless all parts of the universe are secure. And that therefore certain maladies like poverty, inequality, their universality and the vulnerability that they expose all of humanity to comes home very clearly in the days of the pandemic. But secondly, we have very, very clearly seen the stark consequences of the unsustainable normal that preceded the pandemic. Declining commitment, adherence to commitments, particularly of ODA to least developed countries, inadequate attention to the consequences of climate change, particularly to vulnerable maritime communities, like small islands and coastal communities, haphazard arbitrary actions negating the gains of a rules-based multilateral system with affirmative developmental content for developing countries. These are all brought to bear today. But also the pandemic is making something very clear, that the new normal will require raised ambition for constructing a fairer society than the discourse we had before. Already we're losing ground on Agenda 2030's promises. As we reached year 2020, we're taking stock of promises in areas remaining unfulfilled. And therefore, the world has to rededicate itself to do things in a different way and to bring together our best energies and thoughts on how to achieve our shared ambitions for the next 10 years.
Thank you. I certainly want to add to what the Secretary General has said and to reinforce that COVID-19 has just laid bare our realities, the disparity in development that is absolutely clear to anyone who realized the difficulty with which we could access the supply chains, be it on medicine, be it on other scarce pieces of equipment. And we fear and hope that it doesn't occur with respect to food. Similarly, it reminds us that we need, as he said, to be able to work together. The bottom line is that that absence of cooperation and that absence of policy space has hurt countries in real ways that have real consequences for ordinary people. So I really do hope that this will allow, as I said, I quoted the Secretary General's call for a new global deal and a new compact for social contract, but is absolutely necessary. And COVID-19 is literally that event that has made the case absolutely clear for us to make the changes that we have to the development agenda and to the international economic order.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And in a similar vein, Ian Bourne of the Bajan Reporter has addressed a question to both principals. How has the COVID-19 pandemic altered the ability to seek global compliance on modifying temperature changes per the COP Accords? How has the COVID-19 pandemic altered the ability to seek global compliance on modifying temperature changes per the COP Accords?
If I may just put in a brief remark on that. First of all, it depends on which way the dice will fall. If an awakening of our interconnectedness and our collective vulnerability is a lesson learned from the COVID pandemic, then you can see that more concerted effort at approaching the promise of Paris will become more legitimized again, or inversely, a stigma to climate science denial will become mainstreamed again. If that happens, then it has done something positive for us all. But the flip side of it is, if nationalist sentiment continues to be exacerbated by the pandemic, and we construct artificial boundaries between us, the call for collective action on climate change, the international commitments on curbing the consequences of irresponsible human conduct will become a pipe dream and we lose ground. So the jury is still out, but these are the tracks that I see as possible outcomes and pathways out of the COVID pandemic.
I have nothing further to add.
Thank you. Just to be fair, I'm going to give an opportunity to the journalists present, if anyone has a question, to ask. There's a microphone right at the back. And no one is rushing to ask a question, so I'm going to go on to a question from Peter Crawford, a freelance journalist. His first question, is to Dr. Kitui, and it's in a similar vein. What outcomes does UNCTAD expect, taking in consideration the current pandemic and its impact? But he also has a question for the Prime Minister. How is the Caribbean region going to benefit from hosting this conference, and in particular, Barbados? So, Dr. Kitui, I don't know if you want to expand on what you've already said. What outcomes does UNCTAD expect, taking into consideration the current pandemic and its impacts?
You know, one of the biggest challenges of recovering out of the pandemic that we project over the next half decade or so is a resurgence of structural adjustment measures, pressures to sacrifice social cushion as part of economic recovery. And what I hope that we can get out of the Barbados meeting is ring-fencing social gains, ambitious social protection developments, investment in gender equality, investment in education, investment in life with dignity should not be sacrificed in the name of structural reform in order to recover from the costs of the pandemic. That's an important area for me. That's why we at UNCTAD have been strongly emphasizing the need for a global martial health plan for the developing world, but also a significant reallocation of special drawing rights at IMF to help not only the supply side, but also the consumers in the recovery with dignity after the pandemic.
And Prime Minister, how is the Caribbean region going to benefit from hosting this conference, and in particular, Barbados?
I think that the most important thing for us, as I said in my remarks, is the question of being able to influence policy. The Caribbean suffers from a lack of policy space, and very often the world and sometimes multilateral institutions settle on one-size-fits-all prescriptions that are inappropriate for small island developing states. I give the example of a proxy that was used, that I've been talking about, that was used in terms of being able to access the therapeutics for the COVID-19. And what is the reality? That the most indebted countries will get it, but middle-income countries effectively who have worked hard, for example, to remove or to lower the incidence of maternal mortality are being penalized by being told that if your maternal mortality is above a certain level, you will not be able to be part of the group that can access the therapeutics within the context of that structured procurement of the Global Fund. Now, I'm sure that those who settled the United Nations Charter 75 years ago did not intend for the most vulnerable among us to be left out. And the most vulnerable are not necessarily the poorest in terms of the accumulation of debt, but they are the most vulnerable in terms of their circumstances. We, 2 weeks ago, put the country on a hurricane warning. It was reduced ultimately to a tropical storm watch. We face that same prospect every month for the next 4 months and every year hereinafter, because the global community has not responded sufficiently quickly to be able to contain the rise in temperatures. I can move from that to the whole question of accessing concessional funding. You cannot have developing countries in Africa, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, having access to the markets at only extraordinarily high rates of interest. So we're talking about 5, 6, 7%, whereas those in the developed world who have access to secondary markets and repo markets and everything else are being able to access between 0 and 1%. So some of the realities that we face, or even the extent to which regions in the world use their power and size to be able to name and shame countries in our part of the region in circumstances where simple and fuller discussions will allow us to meet the objectives of all, because very often we share the same objective, but the mechanisms that we use to be able to reach there are different, and they're different fundamentally from size and capacity according to where we find ourselves. And therefore, that sensitivity is often not there by those who make decisions in rooms that ultimately have an impact on our countries. So for us, this is an opportunity for serious advocacy to be able to start the process of conversation. It's ironic, when we agreed to host this conference, there was no George Floyd matter, there was no concentration on inequality globally, as we have come to see as a result of COVID. And this therefore allows us to give even fuller expression to what should constitute development and what are the values necessary to push development in the 21st century. Can they simply be the values of the 20th century that allowed us to see the level of disparity between people and countries as we have seen? Or do we need to take fresh guard and to recognize that there has to be a different way? On a very parochial level, we believe that the presence of all of those countries coming to Barbados and their citizens gives us a great platform to engage them as future visitors and potentially even Bajans by choice when they leave here and realize how nice it is. So at that very basic level, it does that for us. But we see ourselves not only representing Barbados, but CARICOM and the small island developing states in this development trajectory that is necessary for a rephrasing, a restocking, a redefinition of the international structures and governance structures. I've already called for a global leadership initiative over and over that reflects not only the role of government, but also reflects the role and influence of those who impact how people behave and how people are nurtured and how people relate to one another going forward. So I hope that there will be a far more holistic opportunity in being able to go forward as we leave Barbados at UNCTAD 15.
Thank you, Prime Minister. There's a question from Peter Wachira of the Star, Kenya. Based on the outcome of UNCTAD 14, do you see any linkages between the two countries hosting UNCTAD quadrennial conferences 14 and 15? And this is directed to both principals. Based on the outcome of UNCTAD 14, do you see any linkages between the two countries hosting UNCTAD quadrennial conferences 14 and 15?
Well, mercifully, we stood in this same residence, this same headquarters, and laid that foundation effectively a year ago. In fact, it was August 2019. So I'd like to believe that UNCTAD is only allowing us to become even closer as two countries, Kenya and Barbados. And Dr. Kitui, fortuitously, is a Kenyan, so that has made it even doubly special for us. So, Dr. Kitui?
Well, thank you very much, Right Honorable Prime Minister. When I arrived in Nairobi, I was reminded of your last visit to Nairobi as the national guest of honor during the National Day of Kenya. And you are taken very, very generously as a good friend of this country. At Nairobi, in exactly 4 years ago, UNCTAD tried to mold the aspirations and hopes of inclusive prosperity into an action program for 4 years. In Barbados, the world will be taking stock of the steps that have been made since Nairobi, and particularly what have been the missed targets. Where are we lagging in our commitments? How can we find the levers that will enable us to accelerate towards achieving the ambitions of Agenda 2030? But also, it gives us an opportunity to take stock of the pandemic, which was not foreseen in Nairobi, both in its negative and its health consequences, and in its positive in rallying us towards a shared global challenge. We hope that there is a strong line of commitment to humane action, to inclusion, to keeping hope that we can achieve shared prosperity between Nairobi 2016 and Barbados next April.
Thank you, Secretary General. And I think this is our final question. It comes from Voice of America, Venustu Neshimiyimana, I believe I got that right. And this is directed to Dr. Kitui. Considering the impacts of COVID-19 so far, what would be the key priorities of UNCTAD going forward? Considering the impacts of COVID-19 so far, what would be the key priorities of UNCTAD going forward?
The key priorities are: one, let's deal with saving lives, listen to science, align political policy making with scientific evidence and recommendations to keep us alive. And the second is address the underlying vulnerabilities that predated the pandemic that have made some get hit so much more than others. And third, universalize the call, the mobilization for recovering better, a more prosperous but also a more hopeful recovery across the world, knowing that some sectors will be wiped out, but create possibilities for the new economy to give livelihoods to as many as possible, particularly in vulnerable societies and vulnerable communities. This is what our hope to be a major outcome of the next conference.
Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you, Prime Minister, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. This brings our program to a close. We thank you all for participating, and we wish you a good day.